Today's episode is sponsored by civic engagement podcast Future Hindsight, who are back with an all-new season on systemic racism in the U.S. Each week, they'll explore how the legacy of colonialism still permeates our country and how we can rectify it. Listen in this week as they discuss the monumental failures of Native American education policy, both past and present. Think about ways to repair this damage. Listen to Future Hindsight wherever you get your podcasts. Now for this show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Nancy Leong, Denver University professor of law, the William M. Beaney Memorial Research Chair, and the author of Identity Capitalists, the powerful insiders who exploit diversity to maintain inequality. Also on the program today, infections down as Biden marks 500,000 dead. Johnson & Johnson say they can deliver 20 million one-shot doses over the course of the next 5 weeks. Supposedly still on track for 100 million doses by midsummer. Merrick Garland cruises through nomination for the Attorney General. Meanwhile, Becerra may face turbulence at his HHS confirmation hearing. Near a tandem, all but sunk. Senate hears testimony from Capitol law enforcement officials over the Republican riot. And David Perdue, not going to happen. Out for the 2022 race versus Raphael Warnock for the Georgia Senate seat. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, remember him? He lost twice yesterday at the Supreme Court. Once where prosecutors can now see his taxes, and twice when the court said, we're not going to hear your so-called election fraud cases. A Colorado probe shows that Elijah McClain was killed by a police-overseen paramedic injection of a tranquilizer. Joe Manchin looking to cut the minimum wage in the COVID package bill to $11. New Jersey legalized cannabis. Arkansas State Senate approves an abortion ban. And Virginia bans the death penalty. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Joining me, as always, Emma Vigeland. Emma, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Didn't realize how much this sweater would contrast with the beautiful panels we have, but I guess I'm just trying to represent all of the secondary colors on this Tuesday morning.
Yeah, well, that is it's very thoughtful of you.
Yes,
it's it's also a little bit of a nod to spring, which is coming. Brendan just sent me a very funny A little bit late, pun on David
I didn't want to
Perdue.
interrupt you while you were doing headlines.
No, it's too bad. No, I appreciate that, but
I was
I do
wondering
feel
what
like
distracted you there.
yeah, I do feel like it's too worthy of a of not being repeated. The David Perdue headline that he is out for the 2022 race against Warnock makes him David Perdon't.
Oh, good job, Brendan.
There you go. So there it is.
I'm
David
stepping
Perdon't.
into Matt's role.
Hate to tell you good job, but yeah,
There you are.
you did all right.
So there are hearings that are taking place, multiple committees in the Senate that are hearing the instances as to exactly, how people were able to, or I should say, how security for the Capitol was so insufficient, with reportedly at least some intelligence that this was going to be a potentially dangerous situation there. Those hearings continue. We know that in the House, the COVID relief bill is slated to be voted upon either Thursday or Friday. It depends on how quickly it moves through committee. It will then move to the Senate. Joe Manchin has come out and said that he will offer an amendment to the COVID-19 relief bill in the Senate that would cut the minimum wage from $15 to $11, which I don't know if that amendment passes or if there's ways to prevent that amendment from being introduced. But it does suggest that the minimum wage will be in that reconciliation bill. Now, we don't know for sure, but and Joe Manchin is using this as an opportunity, I'm sure, to sort of do a little posturing. The other story, of course, that is Joe Manchin adjacent. I have a feeling we're going to be mentioning Joe Manchin's name quite a bit over the next 2 years.
Well, he is the president, Sam, but I have to say something quickly about the minimum wage. If that's the compromise and that's what's included in the COVID bill, that's a failure on the Democrats' part. They should not include it in the COVID bill if it's anything less than a $15 minimum wage increase, because they can get another bite at the apple, as you'd say, in reconciliation on a standalone minimum wage bill. Do not stoop to $11 just to appease Joe Manchin. You can do another reconciliation bill with $15 minimum wage.
Well, you could, but you'd run into the same problem, right?
I don't think so. You could have more time and you could whip more votes and you could make it.
You're not going to get more than 50. You're not going to get any Republicans to vote for this.
Right. But we've seen that Manchin is susceptible. Geez, I'm becoming you to political pressure. And if you just make it about that one specific topic, because there's a hard deadline as benefits expire with this COVID relief bill, there's not enough time to negotiate and talk about these kinds of things. Unless it's $15, I don't want the Democrats capitulating or, caving to Joe Manchin.
What I think would be what I'd like to see is someone offer an amendment that says, okay, $15 minimum wage nationally, but in West Virginia we'll make it 11, and see how Joe Manchin appreciates that at that point. I'm in West Virginia. I love Joe Manchin because he got me that $11 minimum wage raise as opposed to $15, and see how he reacts there. I mean, I think to a certain extent this is. There's not going to be any better opportunity than now, it seems to me. This is, we're going to see a lot of other things in the next reconciliation bill. And I think $15 minimum wage, when you tie it into the COVID relief is going to be easier to pass. The next one's going to be trickier. But we'll see. There are ways you can deal with amendments that you don't want, I think, if I'm Chuck Schumer. And maybe that is also just his way of saying, like, hey, I'm opening up negotiations here. What are you going to give me for me to back off my amendment? We shall see. But the other Joe Manchin adjacent story is, of course, Joe Manchin coming out. He's horribly offended by Neera Tanden's tweets. And apparently Susan Collins also horribly offended by Neera Tanden's tweets. Mitt Romney, horribly offended by Neera Tanden's tweets. Now, you had people like Rick Grinnell that all these people voted for. You've certainly had more offensive people, I think, arguably, voted on by these people. But at the same time, Neera Tanden has a problem because she just doesn't have a constituency. And there's no one really fighting for her. I know we've talked yesterday about some progressive organizations that are at least paying some lip service to, and I think to a certain extent, there is an argument that you don't want the partisan nature of tweets to be something to set as a precedent for sinking people's nominations. But the problem that Neera Tanden has is she doesn't have any, politically speaking, any real group of friends who are going to stick up for her at this point.
Oh, wow. I wonder why that is, Sam. It's almost like she's the divisive figure who used her platform to be abusive at times and at the very least an attack dog for the Democratic Party. So she alienated people. Yeah, Susan Collins isn't going to vote for somebody who attacked her repeatedly. She
wasn't just an attack dog for the Democratic Party. She was an attack dog for a certain group of Democrats who were attacking other Democrats to the left of her.
100%. I mean, the idea that she would not be a controversial nominee is ludicrous. I'm 100% fine with. In fact, I'm thrilled that Joe Manchin is using this vote against her as an excuse to then vote for the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, as it seems like he's posturing. If that's the chum that he throws in to bolster his political narrative that he's, I don't stand with either party, I'm some sort of renegade, I'm thrilled with that, because Neera Tanden is a questionable person who has made a lot of poor decisions and was potentially an abusive boss based on some allegations. And also, we need those checks and those benefits from the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill as soon as possible.
And we're going to have Robert Reich on the program tomorrow, not to talk about this specifically, but there's one of the names being floated is Gene Sperling. And Robert Reich worked with him in the Clinton administration, I believe. Certainly, Sperling was a national economic advisor under Clinton and under Obama. Supposedly, the Gene Sperling of today is better than the Gene Sperling of that era. Robert Reich might be able to give us some insight into that. We will talk to him tomorrow. In the meantime, Ted Cruz, still out there. We spoke to Naomi Klein yesterday about this dynamic where the Republicans, because they have basically run out of policies that are horrible in Texas because they've implemented all of them, and we're now seeing the implications of it. Ted Cruz is doing overtime yesterday because he's got two problems. He's got just the general problem of all that deregulation in Texas left Texans completely exposed, like literally and metaphorically, to the elements. And on top of that, of course, Ted Cruz was not one of those Texans so exposed because he was in Cancun, at least for the beginning of it. And to the extent that he was exposed, he could cover himself up with suntan lotion. But here he is on the Ruthless podcast explaining how he is the victim because his wife's group text with their neighbors as they were advertising the fact that, like, oh, my husband, who is one of two senators for this state, is taking us on a rescue flight to Cancun.
Yeah, I will say Heidi's pretty pissed at that. She actually was over to a neighbor's house yesterday, sort of walking through. So she texted several of our neighbors. Now, look, our neighbors, we've got a number of Republicans who are neighbors, but we also have a number of Democrats. Right. And so, with folks on our street who put up Beto signs, which I thought was a little rude. But I was, I didn't like hold a victory party in the front yards when we won. So, look, obviously it's a sign of how ridiculously politicized and nasty and just, here's a suggestion. Just don't be assholes.
Yeah,
just, treat each other as human beings, have some degree, some modicum of respect. Heidi and I have lots of friends who are Democrats, and we'll.
Don't be an a-hole, he says. Like, for instance, if you're in a position if you are a public leader at a time of crisis in your state, don't skedaddle to Cancun. That, to me, is the definition of a total a-hole.
Oh, were his feelings hurt that his neighbors put Beto signs in their front yard? What a little snowflake, huh? Are his feelings hurt? Oh, go back to your safe space, Ted Cruz. I mean, by the way, dude, I know that a majority of the money that you get comes from corporations, wealthy donors, etc. That's how you make most of your money, but ostensibly you're paid by the taxpayer. Those taxpayers are freezing right now, and you're jetting off to Cancun. So my suggestion to you is don't be an a-hole.
Speaking of Snowflake, that's the name of the dog that they left behind in the house, apparently.
You're an animal. You have cats. My family has a dog, grown up with dogs. What kind of person leaves their pets behind with as they jet off to Cancun and it's sub-freezing temperatures?
An a-hole. It's an easy answer.
There you go.
All right. Well, listen, we got to take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Nancy Leong. She is the Denver University Professor of Law, the William M. Beanie Memorial Research Chair, and the author of Identity Capitalists, the Powerful Insiders Who Exploit Diversity to Maintain Inequality. Be right back. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report here with Emma Vigeland, and joining us now, there she is Nancy Leong. She is a professor of law at Denver University, the William M. Beanie Memorial Research Chair, and the author of Identity Capitalists, the Powerful Insiders Who Exploit Diversity to Maintain Inequality. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk about my book.
Yes. Let's start off with the story that you tell at the wedding reception here. That at the very least, I think got you thinking about these topics on some level. It reminded me of something I'd seen before, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I start the book with a story about a wedding I attended. We'll just say it was a while ago. And this was a wedding of somebody who I knew in college. And I was actually a little bit surprised to be invited to the wedding because I hadn't kept in touch with this friend so much over the years. And, then I went to the wedding, of course, as you try to do. And when I got there, it was a beautiful ceremony. It was actually quite a small wedding. But, very enjoyable. Everybody's drinking and dancing and having a good time. It's a typical wedding. And during the reception, this long time ago friend of mine came up to me, and she was maybe a little bit tipsy at that point, I think it's fair to say. And she said, I'm so glad that you could make it to this wedding. It wouldn't have been the same without you. If you hadn't been here, everybody would have been white. And I think what showed on my face was not what was going through my brain at that point in time, but it really started me thinking about why it was that my friend wanted me there. I mean, I think, of course, it wasn't just because I'm not white, but I think that was part of the reason why, out of, all of the longtime friends that you have in college, she wanted me to be at this wedding. And, after that, I started noticing other situations in which people seem to place a value on having, let's say, a person of color or a person with a disability or somebody from some other marginalized identity group around, right? Like just for, let's say, getting credit for that. And that was kind of where the book started.
And you, I mean, because and part of this was a function of essays that you've written over the past, I guess, almost decade now, right? And I noticed one thing that's just struck me, and maybe this is a little bit meta to start with, but you went from racial capitalism to identity capitalism, and why not? Maybe there's a good time to define that term, and also to tell me like how you came to sort of widen, I guess, the focus in terms of identity, or is that a widening of the focus? And also, I don't want to lard up this question too much, but the difference between what value your presence had to your long lost friend at the wedding, the emotional, I guess, currency versus the actual currency that capitalists will traffic in.
Yeah, Sam, I love this question. And so to kind of start with the idea of racial capitalism, which I have been writing about, I published an article in the Harvard Law Review on this topic in 2013, but I've been working on it since 2011. So you're right, it literally is almost a decade. I hadn't thought about it quite like that, but it really has spanned almost my entire academic career. But so I originally wrote about racial capitalism, which to define a racial capitalist, that would be somebody who's a member of the powerful racial group, right? The racial in-group, specifically white people, who extracts some sort of benefit from somebody who's not a member of that group. So a white person extracting some sort of benefit from racial diversity, whether it's from a specific person or perhaps from, just having racially diverse people around more generally. So to broaden that to identity capitalism, the idea is that an identity capitalist is a powerful person, or it could be a powerful institution, who is also benefiting, whether it be socially, economically, in some other way, from the idea of diversity, right? From having diverse people around, they're gaining some sort of benefit. In terms of the final part of your question, right? Like why I broadened it. I mean, I always thought that probably the concept of racial capitalism could expand to include other identity categories. Like it wouldn't just be race. It could also, let's say, include gender. It could include sexual orientation. It could include socioeconomic status. It could include disability, for example, and maybe some other identity categories as well. Like my goal is not really to, set out a list and say, here's the definitive list and no others. But I think this idea of insiders using the identity of outsiders is one that's really common in society. I mean, we see it in law as well. We see it in policy, we see it in all different areas of society. And so that's really why I wanted to expand the concept of racial capitalism to identity more generally.
Well, I'm reminded of this like famous segment that might have happened, I guess, on CNBC, or infamous segment, I should say, where they put up an image of 5 CEOs of defense contractor CEOs and talked about how, isn't this amazing that Raytheon has a female CEO? All of these industries that when you look at what they actually do, it's I think net negative on society, something like that. The PR spin using the identity of the leaders of their companies in order to kind of obfuscate what they really do. So I think that's a good example, or a good way to transition into what are some of the consequences of this dynamic in terms of our capitalist society on a broad scale.
Absolutely. And Emma, I love that example so much. And it actually transitions really nicely into something I was hoping to talk about today, which is that, as the result of the protests last summer, we were kind of in this moment of racial reckoning right now. This is something that people are thinking about in the country. I'm going to say optimistically, in a way that they haven't in the past. And I think there's a real chance of influencing law and policy in a way that's ultimately positive. At the same time, since Emma was kind enough to bring up corporate America, I think that and this is really my concern with identity capitalism more generally. There's this phenomenon, especially in corporate America, where companies are performing diversity, but it's not really clear like what they're doing substantively. So maybe to give a concrete example, you know, in the wake of the racial protests and this racial reckoning that we're in the middle of, a lot of companies that, let's say, are fashion retailers are starting to use more models of color, and especially Black models. And I think that's great. You know, I think that there's a lot of positive signaling that goes on there. I guess my question is, well, what else is going on besides signaling? Like, is the company donating its profits? Like, how is it treating its workers? How is it advancing people of color within the company itself? And so what I really worry is that identity capitalism, right? Like this practice of gaining value from a particular identity group is replacing more substantive or more policy-oriented reforms.
But this is more than just like a critique of public relations versus sort of substantive change, right? I mean, what's interesting to me, and you know, one of the things that the wedding story reminded me of was I had been down on to one of those Glenn Beck rallies, 9/12 rallies.
Bless your heart.
Yes, exactly. And there was a guy there who, a white guy who had traveled ostensibly with his friend who was a Black guy, and was walking around with him and had a sign, the white guy, with an arrow pointing to his Black friend that says, "Do I look racist?" And there were people running up to them taking photos. And I was like, wow, they're really leveraging this guy here. But I guess my, and so that, you know, sort of quality, I think is like sort of like is fairly clear. But is this a question of a critique of capitalism, or is it you're talking about the leveraging of the exploitation of the concept of identity that for which you need to exploit a person who has an outgroup identity to profit? Is it a critique of capitalism, or are you using capitalism in this instance as to the dynamic of the exploitation?
So I'm using capitalism more in the sense of social capital, right? Whether that's on the one-on-one level, like the man and the Black best friend that you're describing, which must have been, I'm going to have to see if I can find a picture of this and put it in my next book.
You can Google the video, like, I think it is.
I'm sure it's all over the internet, and everybody who took pictures with this pair of people. And there's something really interesting going on there too with the Black friend, which I'd love to explore a little bit more. But to go back to your question, you know, I mean, I think that I'm using the word capital or capitalism in a couple of different ways. One of them is in terms of social capital, like the sociological concept of social capital meaning status. And so there's a way in which kind of performing non-racist or non-sexist or just generally, inclusive values contributes to a person's social status, right? Like it maybe shields them against charges of racism, it gets them attention. So I think there's a dimension of this that really fits more closely with the concept of social capital. But then to tie that to the example that Emma gave a moment ago, I think that it bleeds into this broader system of capitalism that we're all kind of existing in, right? Like when a company is purely profit driven, then of course it will try to maximize its profits any way that it can. And one way that it can do that is by showcasing relationships, again, with diverse people, particularly in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests, Black people. And, you know, so I think that we're talking both about social capital, maybe in the one-on-one sense, and more broadly, just the entire system of capitalism. And I don't see those two things as disconnected from one another. I think that they're interconnected in really interesting and sometimes problematic ways.
Yeah, well, I've seen such an uptick in these kinds of ads and commercials like this. Like I read a bit of your interview in Vox, and they cite the 2018 Dodge commercial, I believe, which used Martin Luther King's words in order to sell cars, which is insanely egregious. But, you know, I've talked about this on the show. I'm a big New York Rangers fan, and they have ads every game for JP Morgan Chase, which is one of the sponsors of the team, talking about how much JP Morgan Chase has done to help the Black community. And then you also see Nike is a great example. They got on the Kaepernick train, I guess, and they actually did support him. He has a contract with him, but they've kind of leaned into it even more so in a more sincere way than other companies. But still, they're also profiting off of horrible labor practices internationally, and so they're not saints in this matter. There are just different degrees and flavors of which these corporations exploit and use kind of the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial justice movement in general that goes beyond even just saying having a Black face in this place or a Black person representing their company, for example. There are marketing strategies that are becoming more and more ubiquitous and more nonsensical, like the JP Morgan Chase example.
And I think, one thing I do want to emphasize is that it's not bad. The Martin Luther King example is a little questionable, but I'm not protesting, of course, the use of more actors of color in advertising or models of color in fashion advertising. Like, that's not the point of all of this. But I think the question is, well, what goes on when the lights are off? What's going on behind the scenes? And you mentioned Nike. One of the things I found out in the process of doing research for my book, I think this is in chapter, well, you'll have to read to see which chapter it's in. I can't even remember. It might be chapter 1. But anyway, I found out that Nike has actually donated to a lot of politicians who pretty vehemently and outspokenly oppose reform of police practices, even ones that are pretty popular, like body cams or making police disciplinary records public, things like that, right? Like things that actually do have quite a bit of bipartisan support. Nike has nonetheless donated to politicians that oppose these kinds of reforms. And this is despite all of these ads featuring Colin Kaepernick that say stand for something, right? So it's like they're kind of trying to have it both ways. And this is the thing that concerns me about identity capitalism, is when it is all show, or at least partly show, and not as much substance backing it up.
Let's talk about this, your concept of identity entrepreneurs, who maybe that guy at the Glenn Beck rally was one of those. You're also probably the only law professor I will ever interview who is maybe even knows who Diamond and Silk are, but certainly who has referenced them in a book. Explain to us what this concept of identity entrepreneurs are.
So I'm no longer the only law professor because I've educated all the others. Everybody knows about Diamond and Silk now.
Fair enough.
And it's all my fault.
You'll get a footnote every time they mention them, though.
With respect to Diamond and Silk and the Black gentleman at the Glenn Beck rally, Sam, that you mentioned, these are what I would call identity entrepreneurs. And an identity entrepreneur is a member of a historically marginalized group. So, for example, to make it concrete, a Black person who who leverages their identity for some kind of benefit to themselves. And it might be a social benefit. It might be an economic benefit. There might even be a policy benefit to it. But so an identity entrepreneur is somebody who kind of sees this market for marginalized identity, whether it's people of color, women, again, LGBTQ people, whatever the relevant marginalized group might be. An identity entrepreneur is somebody who sees the value of being a member of this marginalized group and figures out how to make their marginalized identity available in a way that brings some benefits back to them. And again, I don't think this is necessarily bad. I think identity entrepreneurs are complicated, but I do also think that it's important to look at not just the identity entrepreneur as an individual, but also the effect that the behavior of identity entrepreneurs can have on the member of the identity entrepreneurs group as a whole. So this gentleman who is willing to walk around with a sign pointing to him that says, "I'm the Black best friend," or whatever it might be, how is he causing other people who see him to think about Black people and to think about Black people's humanity and to think about what are appropriate ways to treat Black people, right? So, I think some people would like to believe that all of our own individual actions exist in a vacuum. And I suggest that that's not true in the book, right? And so we should kind of see identity entrepreneurs in that light.
Well, we see.
I just want to follow up on this because I understand this dynamic, and Diamond and Silk are, they are definitely trading on the fact that they can be supporters of Donald Trump and show that Donald Trump is having an impact in the Black community. At the same time, though, like I know from my own personal experience, it's a narrower example, but I feel like this probably happens even in far less specifics. I used to be an actor. I would walk into a room and the writers were basically me 20 years from when I walked into that room. Obviously, as an actor, you're clearly selling your identity, right? It's got to be fairly tailored. But to a large extent, I walk into a room in corporate America, I'm trading on my identity. It's just a lot less explicit, isn't it? I mean, I walk into that room and there's an understanding of like my value is just that like, we're not going to have to worry about any type of issues with this guy here. He's just like us type of situation.
So I think there's a way in which all of us are trading on many different aspects of our identity all the time. An example that sometimes I use with my classes is physical appearance, right? I mean, people trade on their physical appearance in all sorts of situations, from private romantic situations to, there's research that shows that people who are more physically attractive tend to be more professionally successful. And is that right or is that fair? I think the answer, I guess, unless your profession is model or something like that, probably not. Like, it's probably not the optimal situation. But I think that there are lots of situations where people trade on their identity and it's not problematic to do so. I think the concern is that in certain situations when somebody is trading on their identity in a way that kind of feeds the demand for diversity, what they're doing is providing an opportunity for people who would like to acquire some of the status of having, like a racially diverse group of employees or a racially diverse group of actors in their ad or something like that. Trading on the desire of these people for diversity. And so the reason that that's problematic is that it's missing an opportunity for more substantive reform that could involve both the...
You're breaking up just a little bit, Nancy. Are you there?
And the institution, right? Like it's... Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes. So it interferes with, on some level, or it's used as a substitute for creating a more equitable, I guess, workplace, and then broadly speaking, society. I guess what I'm talking about, maybe it was a bad example to use as an actor. What I'm talking about is that my whiteness, I'm trading on my whiteness. It's just that it is a commodity to me and to white people. It's just not one that I have to explicitly worry about because I'm in the in-group. And so when I walk into the room as a white male, there's, I I mean, there are rare occasions where I've walked into a room where I'm not in the in-group, but that's very rare. And when I walk in there, I automatically get the benefit of being part of that in-group. And it's not just in that room, it's also broadly speaking in society.
And so I think one of the problems with identity entrepreneurs, and I hope my internet connection is holding up. I actually moved into a new house recently, but I think one of the problems with identity entrepreneurs that maybe relates a little bit more closely, Sam, to the kind of phenomenon you're talking about is the idea that in order to be accepted, you just have to show up and to simplify a little bit, you just have to show up and be a white guy, right? Whereas somebody who is perhaps not a traditional insider to those situations, let's say a woman of color, I mean, I think that when I show up to give a talk at a conference or something like that, legal academia is still a lot of old white guys. And so I think that there are pressures about how to perform identity, right? Like there are pressures to be the right kind of Asian woman. People look at me, to see if I'm going to be like an angry Asian woman or kind of an Asian woman who's easy to get along with, right? And I think that these questions are not necessarily automatically triggered by the presence of a white guy. And so maybe that speaks a little bit more directly to the kind of situation you're talking to. But I think that this is one of the issues with identity entrepreneurs as well, is that the whole concept of being an identity entrepreneur and having this value attached to your identity suggests that there is a right and a wrong way to perform this marginalized identity, right? There's the way that the in-group likes, and then there's the way that the in-group doesn't like. And one of those is going to be more helpful than the other to the person who's a member of the marginalized identity group.
Well, the one that the in-group likes more, I mean, that can be very lucrative, I guess. Like, bringing up Diamond and Silk as one example is, that's more applicable to our current times, but we've seen this constantly. I mean, Candace Owens is a really good example. If you're a Black person who's going to blame Black people for systemic problems, you are likely to get a very lucrative job on Fox News, something like that. And also, I would say maybe in corporate America, you can speak to this. There can be other ways to perform not as explicit of a role as you see on right-wing shows, but maybe in a different way that makes things a little bit more lucrative on that end. Yeah,
I think that there are choices that we all make. And again, to zoom out to the larger concept of identity performance, we're all making decisions about how to perform our identity every day. Like I picked out this shirt to wear, right? Like we all made decisions like that this morning. But there are some decisions that have connotations that are significant for identity. So one example might be to wear, let's say, clothing that has ethnic connotations. So, for example, let's say that an Indian American woman wears a sari to work or something like that. That will cause the people that she works with to think of her differently than if she wears a business suit and a button-down shirt. And I think in some settings, maybe the woman in the sari is more valued. I would say in corporate America, probably she's viewed as a little bit of a, like standing out like a sore thumb in some situations, right? And so these choices that people make that have racialized or identitarian connotations in people's minds can influence the extent to which they're successful in corporate America and I think in other settings as well.
You mentioned, I think it was it may have been in the preface of the book. You used Bernie Sanders as an example of someone who had, in the 2016 race, I think it was, attempting to appeal to Black voters in the Democratic primary, some of like his civil rights stuff. And I was curious about that as an example, because to me, that feels like a demand side. like that there was a quality. I mean, he entered that race. There was not looking to commodify his civil rights activism, when he was younger. But there was almost a demand side, literally demand of like, you need to prove your bona fides in that instance. I mean, talk about that dynamic, because I found that like a curious example.
So let me just stipulate that all politicians are identity capitalists, all of them. Like they all need to do work to showcase their commitment to diversity and, equity and inclusion. And, I think that that's necessary, right? To, at least to win a race as a Democrat.
Right.
And I'll also just mention that, I finished writing this book in 2019, which seems like a really long time ago. But this is one of the reasons that there's not more about Joe Biden in it, who I think is also quite an identity capitalist. But in terms of Bernie Sanders, and I really think that the example can be maybe extrapolated to older white men in general. So maybe we can include Joe Biden in this as well. I think that there's a question. I think you described it as a demand to prove your bona fides, and I think that's right. Like what have you done? Like what have you done for communities of color, right? And I think that this is an example of the type of behavior that could potentially satisfy the demand. I also think that it perhaps demonstrates the extent to which identity capitalism has affected the way that we think about race. Like rather than examining somebody's like substantive record, like what bills have they co-sponsored, what amendments, things like that. Like we look for photos and symbols and, who's sitting behind the person at their rallies, right? Rather than looking for things that are more substantive. And so this is one of the concerns that I have about identity capitalism more generally, is that it's having this, I would describe it as a somewhat corrosive effect on the way that we think about identity.
And I guess it's interesting because on some level, like, I think Joe Biden, it helped him with black voters, and that he was the vice president to the first black president. I think that really had a substantive value to voters in some fashion. And maybe it was, I guess on some level, that is the idea, right? Like the identity and the diversity is commodified, and it's sold back to people as some type of a commodity that brings whatever product they're selling some value. Let me just lastly, because I think it's interesting in the end, in the conclusion, where you say we identity capitalists. You indict yourself on some level as well. Just talk about that because it's interesting on some level. Like it's impossible to escape it's impossible to escape on some level, right? At this stage.
I think that's absolutely right. Like identity capitalism is absolutely woven into the fabric of our society. And so all of us have to make decisions about how we're going to participate in this system of identity capitalism. And I do indict myself at the end, as both an identity capitalist and as an identity entrepreneur. And I think that it's, one hope that I have for this book is that it will encourage people to reflect on how they too participate in identity capitalism and identity entrepreneurship. Without giving away too much about the end of the book, I will say that I've been in situations where somebody questioned my bona fides on something, right? And I found myself very tempted to point out that I actually write about anti-discrimination law, or that I have put a lot of my life into doing anti-racist work. But it would be wrong of me to do that, because that doesn't mean I'm not being problematic in a particular situation, right? And so this is the issue with the kind of thinking that I think the kind of thinking that identity capitalism encourages. So identity capitalism encourages us to point to symbols, or, to point to superficial things as evidence that we're not racist or that we're not being problematic in particular situations. Whereas what we should be doing in particular situations is thinking about that situation and what our behavior is in that situation and whether we should be changing it in some way.
Is this a necessary phase, though? Because none of this, not none of it, but the vast majority of this, what you're talking about, like this commodification of diversity, would not have happened 60 years ago, let's say. I don't know, at least as broadly based. Do we need to go through this to get to that point of some type of real, more egalitarian, just society?
Yeah, I think it might be. And one of the reasons why I like capitalism as a metaphor for what's going on in this book is that if you have capital, you can reinvest it, and you can choose how to reinvest it. One way to reinvest the kind of capital that's derived in a system of identity capitalism would be to just keep it for yourself, right? Like to hoard your social capital or use it to make yourself literal money. Another way, right? Like, so let's say that a company makes a lot of money as a result of an ad featuring a racially diverse family. Their sales spike. I mean, if they donate the profits from that ad or part of the profits from that ad to some sort of group that's doing good anti-racist work, that's a reinvestment in, like a society that is substantively better, not just aesthetically better. And so I think that's one of the reasons why capitalism works well as a metaphor here. But, to return to your original question, yeah, I mean, I think this might be a phase that we need, like, given where we are, this might be a phase that we need to kind of get through to get to something better.
Nancy Leong, the book is Identity Capitalists, the Powerful Insiders Who Exploit the Diversity to Maintain Inequality. Well, let me just ask one more question. Like, who are those powerful insiders?
So I come obviously from a background of law, and in law, we think about identity in terms of groups, right? So I'm not talking about individuals so much, but when we think about the groups that have traditionally held power on the basis of identity in the United States, we're talking about white people, we're talking about men, we're talking about rich people, we're talking about the able-bodied, we're talking about people who are straight or at least perform straightness, right? And so this is the group of people, or the groups of people who I'm talking about when I'm talking about the powerful. Now, we all have complicated and multifaceted identities. That's what the whole idea of intersectionality is about. And there might be situations where somebody is powerful and privileged, and other situations where they're not. But the book really concentrates on situations where somebody's identity groups give them power and give them privilege, and what that allows them to do with respect to diversity.
It's fascinating stuff. Nancy Leong, the book is Identity Capitalists, the Powerful Insiders Who Exploit Diversity to Maintain Inequality. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
All right, folks, going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Emma and I will finish this up. Well, Emma, that I should say, and we didn't get to it, and I had it on my list of things to discuss and forgot, was that Much of this sort of like the era of diversity came out of a case in California versus Backey, I think it is. Maybe I'm mispronouncing that, but it was an affirmative action case. And it was argued by the Supreme Court that there was value in and of itself for a school in the concept of diversity. And in some respects, and I should say this, Professor Leong wrote about this, by focusing on that question of diversity rather than the substantive quality of egalitarianism in ruling in that case, her hypothesis is that we sort of headed down that road, and where suddenly diversity becomes this commodity that is deployed very often by corporations, but also by individuals at that wedding, that people trade off of. And it's a fun read. There's a lot of like pop culture references in it that I barely understood. So, but it's definitely worth checking out. It gives you an interesting perspective on things. And that story of the wedding was just brutal.
Oh my God. I hope whoever she's speaking to was drunk, because that was it doesn't excuse it no matter what, but that was a ridiculous thing to say.
And also doesn't read books by law professors, because it would be sort of a drag to read about yourself in that situation. Clearly. We will also, I should say, put a link up to that video that I did at the Glenn Beck 9/12 rally. There was a couple, but it was quite an experience. And
what year was that?
I don't know when that was. It could have been 10 years ago. I mean, it wasn't about, he was trying the rally. Like I thought, like, wait, 9/12, that must've been back around in the early aughts, but no, Glenn Beck was trying to recapture the energy of the day after 9/11 in these rallies. It really,
it's very respectful.
It didn't feel like that, to be honest with you. I was there for a couple hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours.
Sarcasm.
It did not feel like that, but we'll put a link to that video at majority.fm. Don't forget, you can watch the show if you missed any part of it, 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. on the Peacock app, the Choice channel. We will see you tomorrow. Or we will see you now.
We see you. Just like in Avatar.
I did not see that.
That's like, I think it's the most profitable movie of all time. Still, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I did my best to keep it from
stupid.
Not being by not watching.
We may have talked about this before, but the mineral that they have to extract is called unobtainium.
Must be very hard to obtain.
It's subtle. It's a subtle film.
Unobtainium. Well, that's pretty good. That is that. And do they speak English on that?
Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brendan, for some reason, I think you might realize, or just like anyone other than Sam. I think, so the whole premise is the guy, he gets into an alien body to learn, the main character, to learn how to be amongst them. And he learns the language they connect their tails, and then he automatically knows how to speak their native tongue, I guess. It's kind of like in the Pocahontas animated movie where John Smith, a breeze just goes by him, and then he can communicate with Pocahontas. Anyway.
Wow. I didn't see either one of those.
Sam, I think you might actually like the movie. There's definitely allusions to, the wars in the Middle East of the past, century that I think you would vibe with.
Avatar?
Yeah, because they're there to extract resources as like imperial power.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not subtle, but like the messages, although, maybe the depiction of aliens, of the aliens as basically Native Americans is a bit problematic. The overall message is anti-imperialist, as Brendan says. But it's it's all right.
All right. I'll check it out. Hey, folks, speaking of checking it out, this show relies on your support to exist. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. And when you do, you get the free show, free of commercials, and you get the extra content of the fun half. So check it out. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. Also, don't forget amquickie.com. amquickie.com. Every morning, 7 minutes of headlines. It's there when you wake up. You can find it on our app at majorityapp.com. The app is totally free, or you can find it wherever your podcasts are served. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Nomi Key will be joining us right now to tell us who is going to be on the Nomi Key show. And here
and other things.
She is. There she is.
I was like, wait, I gotta change my name. What was it that you asked?
Who's going to be on your show today?
Yeah. Today we have Josh Fox talking about the Green New Deal. And of course, he has his book, The Truth Has Changed, which was on our book club list this month. And it's a reflection of how the truth has changed over the last, 20 years.
He must feel pretty bad about what he did to Texas by supporting the Green New Deal, right?
That's all his fault. All Josh Fox and all the windmills, it's their fault. Yeah.
Wow.
So it should be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's well timed. Exciting. And so folks can check out your show where? At
twitch.tv, _Nomi Key, NOMIKI _show. Also at youtube.com/The Nomi Key Show and Patreon and all the places. Guys, go check it out. Subscribe.
You've nailed that Twitch.
I finally got it.
Yeah, it does you do a little bit better than when Sam does it.
Yeah,
it's not
I
easy.
have trouble with the whole underscore. I have trouble with all of it. Folks, check out the Antifada. You can find that at patreon.com/Antifada and twitch.tv/the Antifada. They're doing 4 streams a week now, I guess, Jamie says.
Oh, my goodness.
And as always, Left Reckoning and Literary Hangover. Check out the TMBS, still doing some shows to celebrate Michael. You can check those out. And we will head into the fun half, 646-257-3920. We will take calls.
Like the stream, remember? Like the stream.
Oh, yes. Like the stream, ladies and gentlemen. Like the stream. We'll be right back.
C'est sur le bout
I hadn't heard that. The laughter at the end there. Brendan, what's the name of the guy who did that?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I couldn't find the email of the guy, but I'll look for it.
All right. Well, we will.
Leighton Peterson.
There you go. Thank you, Leighton.
Safe boating at bandcamp.bandcamp.com.
Yeah, we should put a link to that.
It's got a very Springsteen vibe to it.
I thought it was more Elvis Costello.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. That's good.
Nomi, how are you?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
Good. So
have a nice break?
Huh?
Did you have a nice break?
Well, it didn't work out that well. It was okay, but there was we had a COVID scare. It turned out fine. Everybody was fine. Oof. But my daughter was worried that she might have had a potential exposure. And so we really didn't do that much for half the time. So.
Oh, no.
Yeah, what are you going to do? It's pandemic life.
Yeah, you didn't do much, but you went to Cancun, right?
I went to Cancun. I went to Cancun.
Listen, we may have gotten on the plane with Ted Cruz. He may have given it to us, but
that's where the exposure came from. Yeah,
naturally. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about. I just want to get your take, and then we're going to go to the phones on Neera Tanden. Merrick Garland.
Yay.
Well, I mean, look.
This week's episode of.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because. Merrick Garland has basically flown through his confirmation hearings. You know, he had to report on the Durham investigation, which nobody cares about except for some dead enders on the Republican side. But all well and good. And Javier Becerra may be in for a little bit of rockiness because I would imagine at least part of it is he is. In the past, at least, vocalized support for Medicare for all. I'm not sure what the other reasons would be, but so Neera Tanden, there's a slight dilemma, it seems to me. It's not dramatic. I don't want to overstate this, but I don't think that Neera Tanden should we should legitimize the reason that she's been overly partisan in her tweeting, because that could open up the door to taking out somebody that we might like in the future. I don't know who it would be, but I mean, if, I don't know, there are, me, me, but I'm thinking politicians like Rashida Tlaib, maybe, or I mean, I just, that to me seems like a lame reason to do it. But if we do get somebody better, which it seems like it's possible now. I've seen two names floated, both Gene Sperling, who was reported by Politico, and the American Prospect. Yeah. And if I can find my sheet here.
And let me just add, though, just to your point about how we don't want to open the door, that's assuming that everybody involved is operating in good faith, which
they're not.
But that's then who cares?
Right. They're going to do whatever they're going to need to do and change the rules for whoever they want to take down. I mean, my only thought is, okay, yes, she's partisan in her tweets, but it's not the partisanship that bothers me. It's the hostility. It's the it's how she interacts with other human beings who stand in her way in any way, how she spreaded misinformation about people, how she character assassinated people. I don't care if she's a partisan. That's why, Biden won. Shocker. He's going to bring in people who think like him. And I don't know. I mean, that's the one point I'll make is that I've said this time and time again, she caused a lot of problems for a lot of people, dangerous situations, frankly. She incited anger, I'll say, from folks online.
And the interesting thing is that where is her constituency?
Great question.
I mean, what's fascinating is that if, let's say, Deb Haaland is attacked,
right,
you're going to see an uproar.
Yes.
From the left. I think maybe even with Becerra to some extent, a little bit, to some extent. And I think there was some sort of what I read as sort of lip service from some people saying like, oh, this is wrong. They shouldn't do Joe Manchin shouldn't do this. Joe Manchin wants that, incidentally. Joe Manchin wants Democrats to say Joe Manchin is being unreasonable or I can't believe he's going to shoot down a Joe Biden nominee. I mean, that's why he's doing it.
Yeah, it's perfect. This is the perfect scenario in my view, right? Like, she doesn't get the nomination, she doesn't get rewarded for her behavior, and then she can be the sacrificial lamb for Joe Manchin to go back to his constituents and be this guy, this weird, specific kind of politician that he wants to be. So then he'll vote for the $1.9 trillion stimulus deal potentially, and then boom, like this is a good scenario, I think.
Well, there's two names I've seen floated. One is Gene Sperling, who has supposedly, changed his stripes since the days of the Clinton administration. The other is Shalonda Young, who is a staffer, and I don't know anything about her.
I don't either.
So those are the two names. One, Axios is reporting that. The Sperling was reported by Politico and American Prospect, I should say.
It's the dynamic with Manchin's so fascinating because I'm of the belief that Schumer can wrangle him, and he's just waiting for the moment when he does. And it just shows that Neera's just not worth it to them.
Yes.
But also, I mean, you asked about her constituency. Her major constituency are the Clintons. And I think they're the only people who ever go to bat for her. And this was probably them going to bat for her and them handing her something, knowing very well. I mean, she's pissed off so many people, and even people that she didn't piss off. There are folks who don't like her on the inside. They dealt with her at Cap because of the Clintonian complex. And I just think that at this point, we all know folks who are in the Biden world who like roll their eyes at her. So no one's going to go to bat for her because ultimately, what I don't understand is they knew this though. So why did they do it?
Why not?
Are they willing to take that loss?
So Sam made this point, right? You can make it better than me because it's your point. But
when she was nominated, it did feel like you give one. You give one, I guess I use the story I give is, when I used to write scripts for networks, I'd always throw in a scene or two so that they could cut something and so I could say no to the other things that they wanted to cut. And I didn't really care about that scene. In fact, I wrote it to be cut. And I have a feeling like every administration, look, you don't want, the Republicans are not going to go around, and Joe Manchin, for that matter, doesn't want to vote for every single nominee. He doesn't want to do that because he wants to be able to maintain that he was a maverick. So he wants to sink at least one. Maybe he sinks two. Hopefully, I don't know who that second one would be, but he wants to sink one. This gives him that opportunity. And like Emma says, maybe, the administration is like, all right, you get a free one, Joe. This is yours. Yeah.
But how great, if he does it to Deb Haaland, it's not a great look to suddenly sink two women of color.
Exactly.
So I don't think he's going to do a Deb Haaland because of that.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And yeah, I just, and last point on her is a lot is talked about the tweeting, but let's just remember that, before she came into power, Center for American Progress was a different organization, and she kind of ruined it and also made it a lot more corrupt than it was before. Not that it was some angel in DC at that time, but she took money from everywhere she could get it and didn't really care where. And I think that should concern people in terms of somebody getting rewarded for that kind of behavior in government. And to a large extent, a lot of think tanks are that way, but Neera definitely made Cap more that way.
It was a campaign mechanism, in my opinion. I don't think it was ever something that was, publishing anything profound the way that, even if it's problematic, some of these other think tanks do. I don't know. It's a Podesta think tank. So I'll completely blame her. I just think that she's part of that apparatus and that's how it functions. But my question is afterwards, though, where does she go? What are they going to put her in? Because she was a sacrificial lamb. What will she be ultimately rewarded with, knowing very well she may not get it. And that I'm more afraid of, frankly.
Yeah, we'll see. Colin, from you're saying that she may end up in the administration in some other capacity that we don't particularly care for.
Maybe, or maybe she runs some other new venture that we haven't even thought of at this point. She's not going away. She's young.
I don't really have a ton of faith in her competence, to be honest with you, so I'm not that worried. Without Clinton.
Oh, Emma, you're so young. You think competence is a bar to success in this country?
Excuse me. Well, yeah, my point is just that without, full Clinton backing and maybe with this public embarrassment, perhaps she's a little more neutered. All right.
Well, she's close to Kamala Harris, so I don't think she's going away anytime soon.
Oh,
competence is not a bar. Incompetence has never been a bar to success in any endeavor,
if only.
as far as I can tell.
It's the inverse.
Well, I mean, again, speaking of Joe Manchin, that guy's not bright.
No,
or he is.
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, Alex Perrine wrote a piece, and I think maybe we'll have him on this weekend, Friday. He wrote a piece weeks ago. Maybe it was a month and a half ago. Don't worry about Joe Manchin. Worry about the centrists. Joe Manchin has his playlet, but it's not terribly complicated. And he has his narrative that he has to build. And I think it's fairly straightforward. It's like, I'm a maverick. Here's proof. I sunk near a tendon. And
100%.
And I voted for COVID. And I put up an amendment to cut the minimum wage to 11, but it failed.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope that's what so.
Well, again, like I'm just, and we can button it up soon, but I just want to make this point in terms of just, how Lieberman was like leading the opposition from the center to, Obama back in the day. Lieberman was there to represent the insurance industry, to represent Wall Street, and those interests are a lot more concrete and less malleable than Manchin's personal branding exercise. Yeah. And so he's not as much of a foe as even someone like maybe Mark Warner might be, and like someone who Lieberman was in the past. So you can really, there are many different avenues for Manchin to achieve the image he's trying to portray. And so that gives wiggle room as opposed to when, Obama was facing up against the Lieberman types who are there to represent and be a firewall for a specific industry.
I think that's exactly right.
The one thing, though, is it makes it harder because you can't go after their interests. I mean, he has some interests, obviously, and that's a reflection of how he votes. But you don't know where his North Star is, in other words.
Well,
it's like
when they sent down Harris to West Virginia, Vice President comes into West Virginia. That has a big impact, right? Yeah. I mean, it's a small state, and particularly, obviously when the governor, supports the checks. I mean, that turned him around very quickly. Calling from a 210 area code. I think I know who this might be.
Good afternoon, Sam, Emma, and Nomiki.
John from San Antonio. How are you, John?
Oh, I'm good. It's glad to keep up the tradition of welcoming you back from your vacation, Sam.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. I hadn't realized it was a tradition, but now that you mention it, okay.
Okay, yeah, great interview with one of my favorite authors, Naomi Klein, yesterday, and a nice interview today with Nancy Leong. A few people made inquiries about how I endured the deregulated frozen hell in Texas that was created by Republican politicians who have no concern for the common person. I was lucky. My electricity never went off, and I had constant access to water, while over 4 million other Texans suffered. Though many of my siblings and friends lost their power. And it's still infuriating to hear stories of mothers gripped in panic while their infant children cry and shiver. Only a few months ago, my mother was on her deathbed, and I can imagine the abject horror I would have had if I had to felt to deal with it, to contend with the fact that she could have literally froze to death.
Oh, my gosh.
I think about all the dialysis patients who are struggling and how many people depend on their insulin, which needs to be refrigerated. There's so many stories of human misery that are inflicted by the awful Republican politicians. We're greed merchants, and they should be called out for their, and as a wiser generation starts to dominate the electorate. Hopefully we'll see changes as we face the realities of the problems that our society faces. Electric bills are being distributed. How much is my bill going to be? $1,000, $5,000, $10,000? I have no idea. I guess I'll find out in a week. City Public Service, which is owned by the city of San Antonio since 1942, initially said that they're stretching the bills out over a decade, while the centrist mayor, Ron Nirenberg, is up for re-election in May, so that people may send their bills to ERCOT. The latest is CPS is suspending billing until they decide, how to bill people. So I've enjoyed your debates with libertarians, Sam, and you're always struck a good balance between approaching a subject with humor and seriousness. But there's a callousness at the heart of libertarian thinking. We're connected in so many ways, and dismissing this reality leads to not addressing potential possibilities because they'll cut into the profit margins of companies and shareholders. This is the wrong approach to deal with the climate crisis, which will only get worse as time goes on. When Bernie made his first run for president, it was a triumphant moment for the left, and it inspired tens of millions of young voters to realize that they're not alone in their ideological views. And every year the movement grows. And of course, we want to be the dominant force and drive change, and I believe that it will happen. It's just a matter of time before it does. But even as before Bernie's run, I remember listening to this show, and you were talking about how utilities should be nationalized. Yeah. I thought how refreshing it was to hear anybody talk like that. And I thought there weren't too many political analysts saying that at the time. Now there's so many left YouTubers and Twitch streamers, and it's hard to keep up with them all. In the wake of all this man-made tragedy, the rejection of this cruel neglect of the people of Texas that was inflicted upon us by Greg Abbott and the rest of the Republican legislature has been swift and has left them scrambling. Though I'm sure Republicans will look for ways to avoid serious change. Texas voters need to have long memories in 2022 and in later elections.
Well, I hope they do, John. I hope they do have those long memories, but we shall see. I don't know. Texas seems elusive, but
yeah. You know that they're going to have a meeting on Thursday, and it's going to be funny because how are they going to address? The fault is all the Texas legislatures. They're the one that should have put the regulation in. Of course, we should go back on the national grid. And there was a good meeting that I saw from San Antonio and Houston DSA, and it had Kate Aronoff, who was on the show, of course, last week. And they were talking about all the problems, But I mean, it's all the Republicans. I mean, it's all they refuse to regulate. They refuse to winterize. I mean, they
John,
supposedly are going to winterize now.
It's the windmills. It's the solar panels. The solar panels are reflecting back the light from the sun, and that's why it's so cold.
What's so strange to me is
I think that
Go ahead.
Even that line of talk is they can't even hold on to that anymore because even they're talking about winterizing. I mean, so that's the very least that should be done. But,
I mean, the windmills power fracked power plants right now, fracked gas power plants. So, if the oil industry and the gas industry is using windmills, clearly they're not that problematic. I mean, what's
Appreciate the great call, John.
I saw some green.
Oh wait, I'm sorry, Nomi. Go ahead. Did you want to talk to John?
No. I just think you brought up a really great point about the memory of this all, and I think one of the greatest crises that we face with climate change is just how quickly the news cycle moves past it. And I mean, Houston was underwater just 3 years ago, and 4 years ago, whatever it was, and nothing happened. And the grid can go out. I mean, this happened in Puerto Rico, as we know very well. And then their solution was, well, maybe we should privatize power versus relying on the public utility in Puerto Rico. And I just think it's so important that he keeps telling the stories, that we keep telling the stories of the elderly who are on dialysis, who were not able to get their prescription drugs because they couldn't keep them in their refrigerators. I mean, those are the stories that were happening on the island of Puerto Rico. And they were completely cut off. Parts of the island were cut off for 5, 6, 7, 8 months. Yeah. And people had, they had no access to water for weeks and their prescription drugs. And people were being airlifted out because they couldn't take their medication. So this is the constant with climate change. And I just think it's important for us, instead of not just focusing on the policies, talking about these stories so people understand how personalized it gets. And that's why it's so powerful about what John just said, in my opinion.
This is just a quick note, just because I did it on the show and I got some tweets about it. Like green energy people were tweeting at me. It's not windmills, it's wind turbines. And I was saying it all last week, so I'm trying to correct myself.
Well, I mean, I'm simply parroting the right wing. For them, it's windmills and it's the sun and water. In fact, here is Ted Cruz on Hannity last night, trying to argue that, yes, it's wind power that was the problem. And look at how tan he is. Oh, gosh. Here we go.
Oh, that smile.
Texas, rightly, and I would highly recommend you stay this way, stayed away from federal bureaucracy as it relates to your power grid. And I would advise strongly you continue to stay that way. That's not what the problem really was, is it?
Well, that's exactly right. Chuck Schumer there was engaged in all politics and not focused on facts or reality. The facts or reality are that Texas has some of the lowest energy prices in the country. The cost of living is affordable. There's a reason people are fleeing the state of New York. There's a reason people are fleeing the state of California, because the cost of living is so high that working men and women can't afford to be there, whereas in Texas, the cost of living is much, much lower. Now, we just came off of a very difficult week where the grid failed 4 million Texans. And so we need to have a serious examination about why that was, why the grid came short.
Pause it
but
for
one of the
second.
major
What's
elements
fascinating about this is he just told you why. Because it's so cheap. We allow these corporations to cut corners for once in a while events. That's it.
Yeah. Yep.
Bingo. I mean, it's like, why is this car I'm selling you so cheap? Because I never fixed the brakes. I saved money. I passed that savings on to you. There's no brakes in this car. In fact,
these tires look bald.
Yeah, the tires are bald because I passed the savings on to you. I don't change the tires. Now, if you ask me, I'm going to hem and haw about it, but continue.
Examination about why that was, why the grid came short. But one of the major elements of that is actually the policy that Schumer is pushing for the whole country, which is the Green New Deal. You look at Texas right now, about 25% of our electricity capacity is wind. And yet, in the middle of this storm, that capacity dropped all the way down to 2%. You want to talk about reliability. The reality was in the cold, the wind turbines froze and the power generation wasn't there. That needs to be fixed. And by the way, that's the solution Schumer is trying to force on the whole country. And right now, the Democrats want to federalize power in the state of Texas. We need to make sure this never happens again, that you don't have 4 million people losing their power. And I got to say, Texans are ticked off that the energy capital of the world, that our grid didn't meet the energy needs of our state. And I'm
so precious. First off, we should just say, again, they cut corners on their wind turbines. They didn't have the heating elements in there that, yes, they're a little bit more expensive, but it's the way we give you discount rates by not making sure that you have electricity, for certain periods of time if it gets too cold. And then I love this fact where he's like, oh, I forgot. My comms person said, don't forget to show that you're pissed off about this, because you got to get inside the circle of trust. And you got to understand all of your constituents are pissed. So you've got to pretend like you're pissed too. And it just took
there's
him
another
too long.
boogeyman. It's not me.
It just took him
it's
too
that
long
AOC
to
woman
get to that.
parachuting in with her Green New Deal.
Yeah, and the $5 million that she raised for Texas while I was jetting off to Cancun. It's all her
Texans
fault.
are pissed. Good.
are ticked off that the energy capital of the world, that our grid didn't meet the energy needs of our state. And I'm confident Texas is going to make sure that doesn't happen again, not by doubling the cost of people's electricity bills, but by making the grid more reliable and more resilient.
Oh, okay. So
That
you don't
doesn't
have to
happen again.
Exactly.
You
So
picked
how
that
is he
up
going
when
to make
was
it more
in- when he was
reliable
studying at
and not?
Harvard. He picked up that accent.
But that's the point. That's the tick. That's exactly what you were pointing out earlier about the ticked off thing, right?
Oh, yeah. He's supposed to say that. Like, oh, I got to recognize that everybody's pissed off about this. I forgot. This didn't represent a trip to Cancun to everybody else. This represented some real deprivation in some instances.
And then he goes off
loss of
there
life.
and he just puts a cowboy hat on and tips the brim down and walks off to music. Yeah.
Into the sunset. Yep.
Into the sunset. That's him. You know, he really pulls that off well. He should smear some more mud on his face and go duck hunting again. That worked out last time.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it?
This is what you call crisis communications help.
Exactly. Exactly. Get out there. He's on everything. He's going on podcasts, swearing on podcasts. Man, I'm a man of the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Call
Again,
from-
he oh, go on. Sorry.
Sorry. 570. Call from 570 area code.
Hello. My name's Jay. I'm from Scranton. How are you?
Jay from Scranton. I'm fine. What's on your mind?
Well, last week I was very happy to see Emma, who did a very good job, interview John Fetterman, and I was really happy to see the interview. But then multiple people called afterwards, bringing up these very weird claims about like an incident that happened like two, 3, I don't know, years ago, about like a jogger. Yeah. And then I like ruminated on it and felt very sketched out because it reminded me of like the Alex Morse situation. And it's like, I feel like it's like a pattern of behavior. Like not on the reaction is on the left, but like it's a pattern of behavior on the part of like the media and like Dem operatives and whatnot to like cynically use these sorts of like personal incidents that are, you know, that are like, it's not a good look, sweetie, but it has no bearing.
Well, let me say,
this
though,
one's a little
hold
more
on.
complicated.
Yeah, no, let me just.
Well, first off,
Let me
I'll let these guys speak to
Yeah.
Fetterman thing because I'm not aware of it. But I can tell you that the Alex Morse thing was completely ginned up and trumped up. I mean, even the facts as they were represented were misrepresented.
Yeah,
And that was literally a plot by the Massachusetts Democratic Party to take him out. So that's a. I mean, I can tell you that I don't know what the situation is with Fetterman, but I do not think that it is that type of. I don't think it's that type of manufactured plot, but let me let these guys speak to that.
It's not. And I looked into it after the interview. Maybe I should have looked into it before, but I was really more focused on his platform. There was an incident where he thought he had heard gunfire in the area, and he basically chased down a black jogger in his area with a gun. And it's not good. I don't think
it's reported on. It's verified.
It's reported on, and he's acknowledged it. And he was mayor at the time too of Braddock. So that's a bad incident, right? And that's something that voters can weigh and make a decision based on that information. To me, in terms of a Senate candidate that has positions that he does, I think it's a rarity, especially in states like Pennsylvania. So if I were in Pennsylvania, I would be supporting him in the primary, and that's what I'll say to that, even despite this incident, because I think you look at somebody's career on the whole and what they've supported.
I think that this field is shaping up. It's going to be a very crowded field. I would not be surprised if more people got involved, got into this race that are more progressive, that are people of color, that are more progressive. There have been a few people who've stepped in not as progressive as him, but are people of color supported by progressive organizations. I think that it's clear there are Bernie Sanders staffers and leaders who have come out against Fetterman. It's not just that
there
incident.
There are also Bernie staffers on his campaign.
True. It's not only that incident. It's his positions that he's reversed and gone back and forth on, like fracking. It's his background. He illustrates himself as being a working class down home guy, but he came from a very, 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 very wealthy family. It's nothing to be held against, but don't put yourself out as this man of the people when you actually came from an extremely privileged background. Amazing if you do come from experience and have a progressive platform. I would not jump to supporting him at this moment. And I'm not a Pennsylvanian, so take that for what it's worth. But I do think that the field will shape up more. And there are there's like 6 or 7 candidates in the race right now. I mean,
well,
there's going to be
he's
more.
taken the non-fossil fuel money pledge, and in our interview, he was
That's
fairly
great.
anti-fracking. So, I mean,
but his positions weren't in the past. I mean, my whole thing is, cool, you want to run the left? That's what Gavin Newsom did. He said he was for Medicare for all, and then 2 seconds later, flipped. I mean, we have to be more realistic as a movement. People will do anything to get elected and be in that left lane in a primary. But if your record does not reflect that fully, we got to take that into consideration. That is professional.
I don't know
politician.
what about in his record has caused that kind of skepticism. I mean, he's been signaling support for Medicare for all for a long time. He supported Bernie Sanders in 2016. Yeah. He's been a union guy too, in terms of how he's both marketed himself and in terms of what he's supported. I mean, they just granted clemency to 13 people who were in prison for life. There are progressive things in this guy's record, and I don't. Yeah. Agree with that characterization, really.
He was for fracking and then went against it and then went back to fracking. I mean, there's a record of, I'm not saying the Medicare for all, I'm saying that was Gavin Newsom doing that. I am of the belief that there are going to be other candidates that are more progressive and who have better race relations. And I think that's a very real issue in Pennsylvania, given the extraordinary racism that had occurred in Philadelphia. And if we're going to depend on Black voters to show up in Philadelphia every election, statewide election and national election, it's extremely important that he address it fully, honestly. But again, there are other candidates. So I personally, I don't hate him. I just don't think he's as progressive as everybody thinks he is.
I think he has a great shot in the general, and I think having that kind of shot with somebody who is at least pretty supportive of a lot of the things that we are principled and stand for in terms of leftists is a huge win and something that I think we should be cultivating.
All right. Well, I mean, that's a pretty good first round on that debate. Jay, appreciate the call. Yeah, you got your money's worth for that call.
Go check out a few. Michael Whitney has been tweeting some stuff. There's been a few Bernie staffers who are just being extremely honest.
It has inspired me to download this. I'm gonna download that. I love that. That was great. Who was that?
Round 2.
Oh, wait.
That was a lot higher. Yeah, it was a little bit higher pitch.
Wait a second. I'm going to shut that down. Hold on. Calling from a 412 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? That's how we should be welcoming back from vacation every time. Appreciate the call.
It's my brother.
That's insane. I can't.
Thank you. That was great. Calling from a 787 area code.
Hello.
Who's this? Where are you calling from?
I'm Josian from Puerto Rico.
I'm sorry. What's your first name?
Josian.
Josian from Puerto Rico. What's on your mind?
Was that a cookie in the background?
Was that what that was? I wanted to ask you about the book that you were talking about with the writer or the author.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about like how I don't know if you talked about this, but I wanted to know if does there have to be exploitation for people to take advantage of identity politics in capitalism?
Does there? I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. Is exploitation necessarily present?
Yeah. No. Well, does there have to be exploitation of these minorities for people in control to be able to exploit identity? Does there have to? Is it necessary? I don't know how to ask the question. I'm sorry.
No, we'll just keep going. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, is exploiting minorities, it's
worry about it. Just keep.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I actually didn't want to ask this question. I wanted to ask another question.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, is that I bought a hat from you guys, and I hope you had the same problems to see if I can have this situation resolved. I bought a hat from you guys, and it actually doesn't fit me.
Oh no!
It doesn't fit you.
It's really, really small, and it says like, a size fits all, like one size fits all.
Yeah.
And it's like the smallest hat.
Man, it's because you have all those ideas.
Is this a baseball cap or like a beanie?
No, it's a baseball cap. The one that says "Left is best" majority report on the front, and it's like black.
Well, it's adjustable, right? You know that.
Yeah, it's adjustable, but it's like it only fits on like the top of my hat. Like it doesn't like stay on my head, and I adjusted like in the like
So I'll tell you what.
Form.
Okay. I mean, listen, I don't want to. This is not necessarily compelling radio, and it's certainly not doing wonders for our merch business. But let me. I'll tell you what. Send us an email, okay?
Yeah.
And at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Put your phone number in there, and we'll figure out something. All right. I mean, I don't know exactly what the solution will be, but we'll figure out something.
I suggest you get bigger hats for your client.
that sounds like a.
Sam, I think you should knit some hats.
Well, I know. I want to take care of you too, so we'll figure something out. But your first
maybe you got a big head, man.
Yeah.
Whoa, she said
I have a big head. I don't think I have a big head. I can't even like.
Sometimes you're the last person to know.
I have like a big brain.
Sometimes you're the last person to know. All right. Well, listen. Okay. Send us an email, and we'll figure something out. Appreciate the call.
And can you answer the question, the first question, just so?
Well, the first question, like, is exploitation necessary? I mean, if you mean,
no. Is it necessary for people to like have that identity, exploiting identity politics? Like, you need to have people exploited, so then people could exploit identity in capitalism. Like, I'm thinking, like, if there was no exploitation, then nobody could take advantage of this identity.
Well, yes. If the power dynamic, and I think that was her argument is on some level, is that we need to. I think. I mean, that's the thing I was trying to tease out, whether there was a critique of capitalism, or simply a critique of the way of, or if she was using that really, and I think she was using it more almost like as the dynamic rather than a critique of capitalism. But I think there is an inherent critique in capitalism there, because the people who have attained, sort of power and resources under capitalism have done so because it's set up in such a way to reward a certain group of people. And so, one of the ways that they maintain that power and money is to commodify everything else around them, including the concept of diversity. So I guess, like in a less capitalistic society, or for some, I think they would say a completely non-capitalistic society, the commodifying people in that way would probably be far less prevalent. Maybe socially you would see it, but theoretically there would be that there wouldn't be the same social stratification that we have, under a society like that. But from my perspective, I think it's like it's a phase of emancipation. That the idea that at the very least there is value seen to pretend that they embrace a diversity, and that's a good thing. At least that there's a compulsion to do that. But sadly, that's where it ends. At least at this juncture. Appreciate the call.
Yeah, because
Sorry about the hat.
I'm
Jump.
gonna end it with the thought that people they ended slavery, but that didn't end racism.
No,
Because
it did
of,
not.
The capitalist exploitation, it's mostly focused on minorities. So I guess that's my thing, that you have to kind of end capitalism to end racism as well, but it has to be at the same time.
Appreciate the call. I'm not sure that racism goes away necessarily with the end of capitalism, but I think that to be frank, but I do think that it certainly diminishes the implications in many respects. I mean, there's institutional racism and there's systemic racism.
But the vehicle of exploiting people who become racist but may not necessarily understand why they're racist, and it's not tied to economics in any way, the vehicle of perpetuating that information and spreading that sickness is a tool of capitalism. So, the people who incited violence on the Capitol, most of them are probably racists. Is it because they didn't get their $2,000 checks that they stormed? No, but they've been watching Fox News and OAN and Q for years and years and years, and don't necessarily understand that the misinformation, the propaganda, the sickness that's being spread to them is ultimately just a tool of capitalism, keeping people down.
Calling from a 651 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Ribbit.
What's going on?
Me? Hello, this is the Chris Lapaco. Hello, how are you?
The Chris Lapaco. Long time no hear from.
I know. I've been real busy at work, and then today I'm taking a little extra long break, so don't tell my boss.
Of course.
Yeah.
So don't say your name or anything. Your full name.
What's your boss's number?
Yeah. Hey, I called in today. I've been feeling a little down lately. Like the hopelessness is real, right? Because I've been politically active, pretty hardcore since 2010. Got involved with Occupy in 2011. The things we were fighting for back then were, $15 an hour minimum wage, student debt forgiveness, immigration reform, end of the drug war. A lot of these things that we are still fighting for, and it doesn't seem like we're making any progress, at least nationally, right? We're seeing local wins here and there, but nothing nationally of any substance that has really changed. It's gay people can get married, some identity politics type stuff, but structurally, we're not seeing a lot of stuff. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, first off, I wouldn't diminish the import of gay people being able to get married. I mean, that's pretty. There's some. Oh, for sure. There's some material, but I think I would say that 10 years is not as long of a horizon in the great scheme of things as you're saying. But yes, there's still a long way to go with this. But there's some progress, and I think locally, I know New York, for instance, they're doing a pilot program where they're now putting social workers out. I think in a couple of neighborhoods in Harlem instead of cops going.
Yeah.
There's I think it's too early in your young life, Chris Lapaco, to have despair. I mean, these things take time, and I think that I mean, it was funny having Naomi on yesterday. We did it as a pre-tape, and so we talked a little bit beforehand. It was just she's like, I was on your show 17 years ago talking about this, and we both remembered. I mean, I specifically remember the first time I interviewed her about Baghdad Year Zero, I think it was. and which ultimately became, it was a piece in Harper's that ultimately became the sort of basis of the shock doctrine book that she wrote. And, from that horizon, I think, when you're looking like 20 years out, you see the progress. It is not like, the way this happens is not like you get $12 minimum wage, you get 13, you get 14. It's like one day, boom, 15 is going to be now. And the actual legislation it's going to roll that in. But that's the way it's like anything else. You push, and it feels like it happens overnight, but it's really because of everything that's happened before then. And so,
capital reacts immediately after too. So then you have more to push. Like you have a big win and then suddenly they come out and they try to knock down every single thing. But to me, that's always a sign that they're losing. Maybe not at the rate that we want, but it comes with a fight. It doesn't just happen because everybody shows up on the streets. They work every single power tool that they have.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's too early to give up. It may be too early to give up at any time, frankly.
I'm not giving up, but I'm just saying, like, well, for instance, we have, it's not people who are not making it easier. They're like the typical centrist libs. Like this morning, I called into the Stephanie Miller show. Okay. I hate listening to that show sometimes, but so I called in this morning. She was, fawning over politicians because, some people have trans kids. Like, that's, cool that some of that stuff's normalized. Like, for sure, don't get me wrong. But these people have trans kids. Joe Biden is a human being who doesn't try to bang his offspring. Like, oh, cool. Like, this is all awesome. And then I'm still sitting here like, man, I can't smoke weed. Like, at least not legally. And so I couldn't take it. I called in and I had a list of things. Like, here are things that we can't give Joe Biden a pass on. Like $1,400 checks. Show me a video where he said $1,400 one time. Like, I haven't seen it. As soon as I mentioned $1,400 checks, she hung up on me. And she's like, I only have so much bandwidth for criticism of Joe Biden. And I'm just like, you're calling these concentration camps are now detention centers. You're acting like everyone knew that he was talking about $1,400. I could go on and on and on about these things, but she hung up on me immediately. So I hope I'm not burning any bridges here with you. Hopefully, you're not good friends with her or whatever. But I think people should call into her show. She only has so much bandwidth. She'll hang up on you.
I didn't hear which show you said.
Critical.
Stephanie Miller show.
Oh.
Yeah. But people in this audience, I would love it if they would call in to her show. Tell the screener that you're so happy there's a decent man who's not orange in the White House anymore. And then once you get on, mention the concentration camps are still open. Deportations are still happening. Private prisons are still a thing. People are still getting crushed by student debt. Do one of those things and then maybe throw in a leftist best Baba Booey type thing, and then she'll hang up on you. Okay. So I want, you
what's the number?
On these politicians as much as you can. They don't care, but we need to get these libs to realize, hey, these detentions, I'm doing it now. Concentration camps didn't pop up overnight. These border zones didn't pop up overnight. This student debt problem was not just under Trump. This is a thing that's been going on for a while. And I'm just, we knew this was going to happen, but God, I'm just.
Well, I mean, I think look.
Thanks for giving me some hope, though.
Well, look, I think, listen, the bottom line is the best way to do this is if you have student debt, or if you yourself are an immigrant, and to call in and not be as, and not make it about, and tell your story, and tell the story and do it in a way that is, doesn't feel like a direct challenge. If you want to, I mean, look, you got to just ask yourself, what's the agenda here, right? Is the agenda just to go on there and say, left is best, Baba Booey? That's okay. I mean, I'm in favor of that.
Okay.
But if the agenda is really, you have a pool of potential people who, whatever these battles come up, will actually get on the phone and call their representative, let's say, or they will become active in a specific thing. You've got to sort of approach it as more about you trying to convince, not necessarily, the host of the show, but the audience. You're going in to do a little bit of like a very stealthily raid of their audience and plant the bug in their head. And so, it's just like I share your frustration about that. Like, it's not helpful at all. People get to be pretty knee jerk, and frankly, sometimes people, who like us, who have a perspective that, like, there's some problems that preexisted Donald Trump, and Joe Biden sometimes was responsible for those. And there were, Joe Biden didn't promise a lot, but he did promise some things. And those he needs to deliver, not just because we need them. It's also from a political standpoint. Democrats, it is important that we don't let, Mitch McConnell be the Senate majority leader. And the interesting thing is like, what can anybody come up with a reason? Like, what is the political reason that we do not have $2,000 checks? Like, honestly, there's nobody even out there going anybody like, but the deficit or the debt, like, we don't even hear that anymore. Like, there is no, and if
Larry Summers, he said it was too far. That's the guy. And maybe that's actually it. Maybe that's the constituency in his ear.
They're not listening to Larry Summers. The point, basically Biden is saying, and he said at that town hall, the broad economic consensus from leftists, from right economic, is that we need to go big. And so his definition is that his $1.9 trillion stimulus package is big. But as Sam said, then why not make it bigger? There's literally nobody. I think there's a
compromise position.
Yeah.
Do $1,400 checks. And then we do also $600 checks in the same bill. That way, it's not $2,000 checks. It's just a $1,400 check and a $600 check. But here's the thing. Obviously, for a huge number of those people, the $600 has far more impact than it really should in a society like ours. But it's needed. But just even as a political matter, like, why even deal with the question of, like you said, 2,000 is 1,400. Like, just make them $2,000.
Part of me is like, maybe that's what it's about. It's just
anyway,
that debate.
I gotta get back to work. Ribbit,
back to work.
That's holler. Bye.
Fired. You're fired.
Sam, I mean, maybe it's just about that, though. It's just about keeping this debate in this corner so it doesn't go bigger.
There's a lot of times where I feel like that strategy that I, expressed about, like, I would put in things in a script. Like, for me,
yes,
the whole threshold thing, I that to me, where they were saying, like, maybe we should do it, we should lower the threshold. To me, that whole thing smelled of a scene that I would write into a script to get to give one to the executives so that they feel like they get to cut something. That's what that felt like to me. Like, we're going to bring
that to me is the Schumer $50,000 thing. I know he doesn't think it's going to happen. Well, that to me, it feels like that. So that he doesn't have to, like, rein in on Joe Manchin and do his job.
Right. Here we go. This is Sterno. The $2,000 stimulus was always $600 plus $1,400. It's true that nobody talked about $1,400, but it's also true that nobody talked about $2,600. If you want to ignore the context of the stimulus conversation and act as though Biden lied, you're not an honest actor. You want an extra $600 to argue it such, then all good.
No, the critique is that Biden advertised it as such. Don't dig that hole for yourself if that's the case.
All right, somebody, Brendan, dig this up. When did Joe Biden go to Georgia and say, you elect these two guys, you're going to get $2,000 check?
2 days before. 2 days before the runoff. 2 days before.
Right. When did the stimulus bill pass?
Last
December.
week. Yeah, last days of December. Yeah.
Okay. So now I get you want to add the 600 to the 1,400, but Joe Biden didn't say 1,400 January 3rd He said 2,000 when the 600 had already passed. So people did say 2,600 if you want to do the math.
Yeah, no one had their $600 check by that point. I certainly didn't.
No one had it, but it had passed.
It leaned on an incredibly sleazy maneuver. And that's, I think that's incredibly worthy of criticism. And just from a branding exercise for the Democratic Party, why would you put yourself in this situation? This is going to be brought up in the midterms. You know it will be. Just like, by the way, I keep thinking about how the Republicans are going to weaponize this Cuomo nursing home data stuff if this asshole doesn't resign, which he won't.
Started it.
I mean, it's like, I mean, but like these are these kinds of, because the Biden, by the way, this was in Sound yesterday, we didn't cover it, but the Biden administration won't distance themselves from Cuomo, but that's a whole nother situation. They're not refusing to, but these are self-imposed restraints and self-imposed problems by the Democratic Party. And Biden went out there and he said $2,000 all over the place. And now this could potentially hurt both Ossoff and Warnock because there is an election in 2022. Right. Purdue's not going to be up for it. But then what if the Democrats lose that seat? Why do this to yourself if you were never going to do straight up $2,000 checks? That's the point.
Part of me thinks this is like they're just revealing. I mean, if there is no loss to doing $2,000 or $2,600 or hell, anything more than that, or regular monthly checks, if there's no loss, I just think they're revealing themselves as being pro-austerity, like blatantly, openly pro-austerity. I can't see any other thing.
I think I think there is a knee-jerk, pro-austerity, a knee-jerk sort of like moral hazard if we give them too much. Like the idea that like if we just go right in with the 2,000, like if let me put it this way. If Joe Biden had gone there and said $2,500 check, I think he would have come in and said $2,000. Like I think, like, honestly, like, I think the question is like, there is and I don't know that Joe Biden has it, but I do think certain Larry Summers has it. There is this sense of like, we cannot train the American public to expect too much.
Biden does have that. Biden does have that. He has it. I mean, this is a whole part of the same dynamic with the debt cancellation. It's for some reason it's legal to cancel $10,000 of student debt, which he may not even do at this point, which is unforgivable if that's the case. By the way, that was a campaign promise too. But somehow then it becomes illegal at $50,000. Really what lies in the middle there is the desire of the federal government and this old school debt obsession by Joe Biden from the 90s, and the fact that he's from the credit card state and he was the credit card senator, to discipline people and use debt as a way to discipline people. And it's the same thing with the government here. Like, you can't expect too much from the government. We'll use it in order to get elected, but like, we'll artificially whittle it down in order for people not to expect too much.
The crazy part of it, though, is the credit card industry probably wants that debt eliminated. But he was one of the orchestrators, as we know, of this dynamic, this horrifying student debt crisis. But as he's admitted, he can strike it out with a pen. Yeah. It's mind-boggling. So what you said, I think you're right, Emma. Like, I think that he's been brainwashed into operating from a place of, indebting people. It is austerity politics. I mean, that's
it's control. It's politics of control too. And it's exactly what people hate about politicians.
And they should.
Yeah.
Because we're all sociopaths.
But, here's another problem that we haven't touched on. And that is, there is a real sense in the world that Meghan McCain is not getting the proper amount of respect that she deserves.
I love this clip.
Because, you understand, she is a host on The View, and she is pissed that she doesn't know when she's going to get vaccinated.
That we are next week it will be a year since we left studio. And I have been very responsible in many different ways, as so many Americans have been. And the fact that Dr. Fauci is going on CNN and he can't tell me that if I get the vaccine, if I'll be able to have dinner with my family or dinner with, I mean, I don't have any grandparents left, but, older people, if I can go to dinner at friends' houses who are older, it's terribly inconsistent messaging, and it continues to be inconsistent messaging. In Israel and Tel Aviv, one of the messages that they have, I saw a sign that said, get a shot, take a shot. Meaning, if I get the vaccine, then I can go out and I can have shots with my friends. Is the science in Israel different than the science here in the United States of America? Because Israel has over half of their country vaccinated already and seem to be doing pretty well.
Pause it. Sorry. Israel, yes, they have vaccinated a lot of people, but only the people that they consider to have rights, right? The rest of them, they're just getting to those people.
Well, I mean, to be more specific, obviously, they haven't vaccinated the Palestinians in the occupied territories. But people should also understand. So this is like the in addition to it being obviously racist, it is also, we've vaccinated the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Country. Now, we should also say that in the United States, we're like top 4 or 5, and certainly in terms of success with vaccinations, and we're still ramping up here.
Right.
But we're actually doing a fairly good job of vaccination at this point. And the reason why you don't see the, get a shot, take a shot, is because we're not at 50% vaccination rate. Large of that because your father nominated Sarah Palin as their VP because he wanted to placate those people who ended up becoming the hardcore Trumpists. But I'm not going to bring that up, Cindy. Megan, rather.
Megan.
But the point is that I would imagine when we get to 50, 60% vaccination rate, that we're going to start seeing stuff like that to get the next 25% or 30% who may be reluctant to get the vaccination. And that's what's going to happen because there is increasing evidence that the vaccination will actually inhibit inhibit the ability of the virus to infect you. And therefore, even, never mind that it's already been quite clear now that it keeps you from dying and it keeps you from getting severely ill. There's also mounting evidence that it has a very high percentage of keeping you from getting infected, which means that you don't have the ability to pass it on to other people. However, we are still very early in this process. So you want a little bit more evidence. And you also are not going to deploy the sort of like enticements until you need to get people, until you have the supply to actually vaccinate people, which needs to be ramped up. Because again, the party that your father built to get Donald Trump left us in this situation, and you want to basically keep people responsible until that point. But continue.
But
because
me.
Well,
I mean, how many times did she say me? Yeah.
Here we go.
I can get vaccinated and I won't be able to see friends and nothing in life changes and then we're going to have to wear masks forever. I don't understand the downplaying of getting the vaccine because right now we should be wanting as many Americans as
You're
possible
doing
to get
that
a vaccine.
downplaying.
The fact that I, Meghan McCain, co-host of The View, I don't know when or how I will be able to get a vaccine because the rollout for my age range and my health is so nebulous. I have no idea when and how I can get it. I want to get it. If you call me at 3 o'clock in the morning, I will go any place at any time to get it. I want to be responsible and obviously wait my turn. But this rollout has been a disaster. And I understand, obviously, President Trump can take much of the blame. But now we're in the Biden administration. I feel like something to look forward to and to hope for. Because if getting the vaccine means that there's nothing.
This is such shit. Hold on for 1 second. Because you should get to that. But the fact is that there are 1.7 million vaccinations a day now.
Yeah.
And already he has surpassed the number that he pitched, which I think he probably lowballed because he wanted to make sure that he could manage expectations. We've just gone through these massive storms across the country, which have diminished it. I'm convinced that within a week or two, we're going to be up at about 2 million vaccinations a day. And they're going to get this done very quick. I mean, she is full of shit here.
But fire Dr. Fauci and don't believe in big government. That's her thing.
And like maybe the vaccine, why are you not advertising, go out and party while, I'm going to downplay the value of the vaccination.
She took it out of the Wall Street Journal op-ed. That's exactly what that was. I mean, did you see that, Sam?
No, I didn't.
No, I mean, basically conservatives are heralding that, yes, we're ahead of schedule. And so we should be able to reach herd immunity by April or May. And why isn't the government saying that? I mean, maybe because they don't want people to throw caution to the wind and take off their masks.
Because we're not there yet.
And we're not there yet.
Much more virulent. But first off, there's much more virulent strains that are out there. And this is a race. And so how do you combine the mask wearing, the social distancing, and the amount of people who have been vaccinated? How do you combine those three elements into maintaining and keeping the infection rate low so that A, you don't get the spread of the variants, and B, you don't create new variants, which happen as the thing spreads around more? But I will say this, Emma, you're mispronouncing her name.
It's me?
Megan.
Megan. I mean, I'm literally going to go back after work because I'm a psycho, and I'm going to count how many times she said I and how many times she said me in that fucking clip. I mean, like, can you imagine, sorry for the F-bomb, can you imagine your political analysis revolving around yourself that much?
But in this way, like she did with, child leave, when she realized having a kid, this could be another opportunity of maybe distribution through the NIH or HHS instead of through CVS and relying on private markets.
Because
Agreed.
Her
I think
responsibility as a political commentator involves solely her experience. And that's what she decides to do with the millions of dollars that she makes on The View and the massive audience that she has. If she's experiencing something, she will talk about it to the public. But if not, everyone's against her. Everyone's against her because she comes from a place of entitlement and grew up a spoiled brat and maintains that image on television. And that's what counts for conservatism on, daytime TV.
But that's what conservatism
is. Right, exactly.
She is just emblematic of conservatism. Oh, the government's not responding quickly enough. I hate big government. Can't keep it up. Need the big government. I hate them for not providing vaccines fast enough. I need the vaccine because I'm a mother. Why aren't you doing anything for me? That is conservatism.
And let's be clear. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, and I just think that The View, I mean, listen, if you want to apply proper pressure, I think my dad texted me this and a petition to get her kicked off The View. Like, I've never seen my dad more upset about anything in my life before. And he went on like a whole rant. He goes, you have to do everything to share this link to get her off The View. But there is truth there. She is spreading misinformation, misanalysis of the state of a crisis that has to be handled delicately. And they have an obligation as a platform to make sure, a very popular platform, that people are not being misinformed.
Absolutely.
And we know what that audience looks like.
Yeah, but Mimi, she's not experiencing it herself, so it must not be happening. And so should she get paid $2 million this year for that?
The other point that she is ignoring is not only is Israel much smaller.
Yes.
So, and look, there's X amount of vaccine that exists in the world. And if you have a smaller place, you're going to be able to vaccinate at a higher rate. The other thing they have is they have universal healthcare.
Oh, look at that.
So they have the ability to simply go, Bill has been vaccinated. Betty has not been vaccinated. We know this because we have universal healthcare that runs through the government. It's not exactly a single payer exactly, but it is a system that is centralized and has more reach. And so if you want to talk about the actual reasons, not just like Joe Biden's been here for a month, how come things haven't miraculously changed? And in fact, in some respects, they have, because all you needed was somebody to get into office who's like, yes, we should do vaccinations, as opposed to, no, let's not do vaccinations. I mean, that is going to bring about a certain amount of results. But the fact is that we have a system in this country that is completely BS. And if you really want to worry about it, you got to worry about the next one. You worry about COVID 2022 or 25 or whatever it is. And you get a system in place that is going to make this easy. So you can just turn on the light switch, essentially. But yes, the misinformation, the disinformation, and, look,
they have an obligation. I mean, this is why CNN it was a slippery slope. At first they were just entertaining these ideas because they wanted opposition. They wanted to offer and then it turned into a network that propped up somebody who ultimately got elected and all of his little sycophants who ended up joining the administration later. This is the danger in having someone who's unchecked, because we know that there's been problems before. I mean, it's happened on air. Other hosts have aired it. This is, if you allow that behavior to continue, then she starts saying crazy things like this.
I mean, The View is one of the most highly rated. Yeah. I think it's the highest rated political show in the country. Am I wrong? I think it's the highest rated political show in the country, because a lot of people watch during the day. And they like the conflict, and this is that's the dynamic, and that's what's being spread. That's one of the commentators on there. I
love how too, she is so used to. Look, her family is extremely wealthy, and the idea that her mom, the idea that you're in a public health crisis. And the idea that Meghan McCain on The View would qualify you for more public health than someone else. Just in that, right?
I know what's going on. This is the first time in her life, one of the first times in her life, she can't just pay to get access to something because big government isn't doing their full job. Mm-hmm. Now suddenly... she's in a place of vulnerability.
I am privileged in this society, and yet I'm not getting it. Well, guess who's getting it? People who aren't privileged like you. Somebody's getting it. It's just not you. That doesn't mean that the system is broken. That is the mindset that's here. If I'm not getting it, and I'm at the top of the heap, I'm Meghan McCain, and I am on The View, and I'm not getting the shot, then the system is broken. This is one of the few occasions, at least, that there's attempts, and it's not working perfectly. I mean, I know that people are buying shots, at least in Connecticut, and I'm sure that's happening all around the country.
California, they're stealing.
In New York, you can't buy it.
Yeah.
And so that, I've heard stories, and let's just talk about sort of the equitable distribution of this. We do know that if you live in a low income neighborhood or community, you are less likely to have facilities to get you shots. You are less likely to have relationships between medical personnel and the community. You are less likely to have the time and the flexibility at 3 a.m. to go run out and get that shot when they call you, because you don't have a live-in nanny like Meghan McCain does, I'm sure. Or maybe she has multiple ones. So you don't have that flexibility. So it's harder to get the vaccines to communities of low income, and also communities of color. And also the need there is greater because a lot of these people are working jobs that require them to travel greater distances, or they're jobs that we deem as necessary workers. And so there have been systems set up to help ensure that certain amounts of vaccine are set aside and are targeted in a way that Meghan McCain only needs a phone call and she'll run out at 3 a.m. in the morning because she'll have her. And, but unfortunately, in LA, apparently, and I imagine this is happening all over the place, LA Times, there's access codes that are given to these communities to make sure that Black and Latino communities get vaccinated. They are particularly hard hit areas. So even if you don't want to even think about it in terms of like a justice perspective, if you want to just look at it in terms of public health, you go to the communities where the breakouts are biggest and you get those communities vaccinated as quickly as possible for the sake of the entire society. And apparently there are, those codes are either being sold or stolen or circulated, and you're getting wealthy people coming into the communities and using those codes. Here is Newt Gingrich to tell you why it is anti-white to provide those codes.
Important thing. If you withhold too much, the vaccines are going to go bad, and then you're going to put many, many more people's lives at risk.
Tommy,
Yeah, well, white liberals never miss an opportunity to pander, and that's exactly what that was. What racial justice has to do with making sure people are vaccinated and public health and safety is beyond me. But again, this is what we expect from the left. This is their woke, radical message that they've been preaching to us for years now, so I don't know why we find it surprising at all. You know, they talk about these same things in equity and distribution in California. That was actually part of their metric in California for reopening was racial justice and equity. So this is how the left operates. This is how white liberals operate. To me, it's not only ridiculous, but it's also rather insulting to those people of color and to those communities because it seems as though they're really talking down to those individuals and those groups of people in a sorry and sad attempt to pander. But not surprised. This is the woke left. This is how they operate. Speaker, your thoughts?
Speaker, no longer.
Look, this is just part of the anti-white racism. It's crazy. You should take care of the medical workers. You should take care of the elderly, whatever their race. And then you can talk about everything else. But what Markey was saying would guarantee a lot more people would die in the name of essentially an ideology which is anti-white.
Harris, your thoughts?
Harris, your thoughts.
Well,
Please
we are
say
seeing
something.
Canada do something like this because the scientists all over the world.
Yeah.
Harris, say something.
Thank you so much for the lead up, Tommy Lauren. I totally forgot you existed. You're not no longer the flavor of the month or whatever.
But the idea of why you would, I mean, it's basically like saying giving it to people over the age of 65 or 75 is ageist. No, you do this to communities that are suffering the most under this pandemic. It is simply a fact that communities of color are suffering more. They're suffering again for all those reasons I said, because they end up having a disproportionate amount of necessary workers. They have a disproportionate amount of travel that they must engage in to do that work. They have a disproportionate amount of, or I should say, a disproportionately lack of medical facilities and public hospitals, and to make sure that people can get, and they have a disproportionate inability to isolate, and they have a higher rate of cross-generational people living together. I mean, there's myriads of reasons of
But
why.
Sam, you're making a case as to how capitalism is racist, and they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear it.
I don't like white people. So
yeah. Well, I mean, isn't that what our the sub headline of our show is, right? It's the Majority Report, and then bringing you news. I don't even know what the other one is, and then beneath it in fine print, it's exterminate the white race.
We don't say exterminate.
Oh, what is it then?
Just let's dial it back. Dial it back. Dial them back, the white race, at every time.
Gotcha. Guys, I feel very uncomfortable as three white people talking about this.
Well, I know, but I mean, we're race traders, so.
Oh, that's what it is, right?
You forgot about that.
That would have been a good name for the show. Calling from an 805 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Almost as good as Bad Faith.
Hey, this is Cohen Telprol from Santa Barbara.
Go ahead, tell Pro from Santa Barbara. What's on your mind?
It's Cohen Telprol.
Oh, Control. Okay, sorry. What's on your mind?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not with the FBI.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Yeah, so I just had some comments on the guest that you had, and about specifically your question about like walking into a boardroom as a white guy. It kind of seems like I would say that's not an example of identity capitalism. At least the particular form that was discussed. It would just be an example of white privilege. But broadly defined, identity capitalism is not new, and it's been part of the United States and a critical tool of capital. So it's been used since the start, with slavery, and it was justified with identity. And then ever since then, the definition of whiteness has been expanded to include more and more groups like, non-Protestants, like the Irish and the Italians, and, whiteness is not just the way you look. It's entirely a cultural, signifier. Anyway, so, but the thing is with the identity capitalism that was discussed, it's now that whiteness is losing its cultural cachet, the capital class is recuperating non-whiteness in order to realign themselves with the culture shift and to stay relevant and profitable. So in other words, every diversity hire is a purchase of virtue signals. And the more protected groups, they're a part of, the more virtues you get to signal as a corporation. And also it's very frustrating to hear you guys talk about this and not get into an explicit critique of capitalism. Especially with the Peacock audience.
Yeah, I agree that it was not the critique of capitalism that I think initially when I saw the title of the book before we booked and I read into it that I thought it was a slightly different thing. I mean, I think like I would only push back on your comment about. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it is purchasing a certain cachet that is deployed in its way of staying relevant. But I would say that white privilege is I mean, look, they're two different commodities, right? They're two different commodities, but it's still my whiteness is a commodity. It's not as quite cleared, and it's not necessarily, it is on some level purchased by a corporation insofar as like, this is going to make it a little bit easier for us to deal with whatever their perspective is, whatever value it has. Yeah. It's a different commodity. One is shoes, one is pants or something, but.
Right. Yeah. And what I meant wasn't to say that your example wasn't identity capitalism, or not an example of that. It's just not an example of the kind I think that your guest was discussing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
But I think the way, that does get to something important, which is that, the flip side of, the commodification of non-whiteness, it's always been commodified, is like, I mean, the commodification of, or the revaluing of non-whiteness is that it's kind of devaluing culturally whiteness, which is where you get all of the reactionary stuff about white genocide and stuff. So,
yeah, this is my zero sum argument. That's my longtime zero sum argument, is that necessarily there is a cultural, the value of being white is culturally declining, and it is, and on some level. But I mean, I guess my point on why I wanted to make the point about my whiteness being a commodity is that I wanted to push it into a critique of capitalism, right? And it just didn't happen. But appreciate the call.
Yeah, and I have one little one analogy about capitalism that I'd like to share.
Okay, make it quick. For a guy who works at the FBI, you really got a lot of capitalist critique.
All
right.
So a capitalist is just the person who hoards tools and then forces you to use them on their terms while convincing you to be grateful of your exploitation. And this applies to even the tools of, cultural propaganda and stuff like identity. So I think that's relevant.
Cool. Appreciate the call.
Thanks.
Do we have time for one more? What should we do here? Ron Johnson, or should we do
save Ron Johnson for tomorrow? I think we can off with that.
Let's do the rush.
Oh.
This is a little brand building, but good for her. I mean, this is she's in Florida, and Ron DeSantis trying to build his brand, trying to shore up the base. This really amazing. Required all state agencies to lower their flag at half-mast because Rush Limbaugh died. And I think this is actually, I mean, as much as this is her building her brand, I think it's a good way to build a brand. Nikki Fried, she's the Attorney General? No. Is she the Attorney General, Brendan? Agriculture, right. And in Florida. And she says, I'm not going to put it half-mast. And here she is.
The American flag should not be used and cannot be used as a political prop by Governor DeSantis. But what he's doing is he's bending over backwards to honor a radio host who spent his entire career talking hate speech and talking bigotry and division and conspiracy theories. And lowering our flag should be a symbol of unity, not division. Raising our standards, not lowering our standards. So we will not be lowering our flags at my department, state offices to honor Rush Limbaugh. And we will not celebrate hate speech. Instead, we will celebrate unity and compassion. And that's also why you're seeing mayors and local leaders across the state of Florida following my lead on this.
I like the message. It's good.
Until the next conservative senator dies, and then she has to lower the
I guess that's true.
Because he's a senator.
Basically Rush Limbaugh, but with an elected official.
Well, I mean, that's the question. Do we know why? What are the standards for lowering? I always thought it had to be something that involved a national tragedy or somebody who was part of the government in some way.
I mean, I think Ron DeSantis perceives it as a tragedy. I mean, this is a guy who was his lodestar for a long time.
If I were the governor, of a state, I'd lower the flags at half-mast all the time. I would have done it when Odell Beckham Jr. was traded.
I knew that's where you were going.
I feel like Chris Christie might have done that, though.
Every time the Giants lose.
Yeah, I would do it every time the Giants lose. I do it every time my cooking doesn't turn out good for my dinner. Every time
folks,
my sushi roll isn't right. I don't. Who gives a shit?
Wait, you make your own sushi rolls?
No, when I order it.
Ordered it.
I was going to say, wow, that's impressive.
Emma, you should run for something in New York because you've got the most sport. That is such an essential component to running for office in New York is having really good sports analysis.
Well, Sam might disagree on the quality of my sports analysis.
What?
But I just we've feuded over Tom Brady, obviously.
Well, no, you just have a classic New York blind spot.
Yeah, so I think it's
Emma,
it's objective. But although I will,
amazing.
yeah. But I might be a little too divisive, as they say.
That is the end of our phone portion of the program, and I will now read some IMs. I'm sorry, folks. A lot of people holding on there, but that is the way it happens. We took some calls. Lumpy. I know it's a local race, but it would be great if you could spend a little time talking about the New York City mayoral primary as time permits. Now is a good time to start throwing support behind a candidate if there's somebody interesting. Oh, we got to put that Andrew Yang thing back on the list too for tomorrow. Okay, Brendan? That was the one that I was thinking about.
Yeah. Last poll, Andrew Yang's ahead by 11 points.
Yeah.
God help us all.
We should
but
get into
it is ranked choice voting, guys. It's ranked choice voting. So.
Can you know me as somebody just quickly, as somebody who's so plugged into New York City politics, just like who are the good candidates for mayor?
Maybe next Tuesday.
I'm not ready for it.
Okay.
Maybe next Tuesday.
Yeah, I would love your expertise on this because I'm I desperately want to get behind somebody.
I mean, I don't want to say we have time, but we do have time. And I think that these debates that they're having, as the races kind of unfold, they start to reveal themselves. As the filings are revealed, you start to see where the money is coming from. As endorsements happen, you start to see who's pairing up with whom. And so sometimes there might be a really good candidate, or you think there's a really good candidate, but you don't understand they're being backed by same people from another campaign and being used. So it's really complicated dynamics with ranked choice voting, which is why I've been really cautious about jumping all in. Although Yang is so easy to challenge.
Well, maybe next Tuesday
doesn't know what a bodega is.
A little bit of clarity on that. We'll take a little time to do that.
Matt keeps saying Matt keeps saying every time, and he, he's on vacation this week, but I'll just steal his take. Imagine Yang in a negotiation with the NYPD, the police union, how quickly
he's inviting Elon Musk to New York City. No thanks, man.
Yeah, no, we need on his website. There's TikTok trap houses as a part of his platform. Yeah. Save us from this, somebody.
We need someone who has, New York superiority energy. We need that. We don't need Yang coming in treating us like it's some second city.
Yeah, and we need somebody who can also challenge Cuomo, like really challenge Cuomo.
Yeah.
Because we still have him for a few more years.
Waiting with a bated breath for Ben Shapiro to leap to Neera Tanden's defense for getting canceled for tweets. She should be getting a movie deal about right now, right? That's true. Chatty Stevens.
Barry
Ted
Weiss.
Cruz.
Where's Barry Weiss?
Yeah, exactly. Ted Cruz begging people not to be an asshole on a podcast whose title is gloating over the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Is that right?
Yeah, ruthless.
We didn't have enough time. I was going to point it out, but it's the picture of the Supreme Court, and then it says Ruth, and then bolded at the bottom, less.
What is wrong with people? What
is demented.
It's wrong.
I mean, I was very happy when Antonin Scalia died. I mean, very happy.
Yeah, but you didn't name your show.
But I wasn't going to name my podcast after it. Wow. Bluesette. I don't suppose anyone's looking into the possibility that senators such as Cruz, Hawley, and Tuberville and their co-thinkers in the House, such as Mo Brooks, were actually co-conspirators in the Capitol invasion because they made sure to delay proceedings long enough for the invaders to come perilously close to Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. I don't think that they would have, if they were involved in it, it wouldn't have been for that goal. I think it was more like, I have a feeling they were playing around with stuff and didn't think that it would get that far.
I hope Sheldon Whitehouse keeps pressing on that ethics investigation.
Yes.
Artie,
He's
I'm
so
so
good at these
disappointed in you, Samuel. I held on and I held on and I held on and you cut me off. You may tell Matt Binder he can sniff my British balls again and again and again. I don't.
This was a caller from last week who was from the UK and was talking about the superiority of the UK system and got into it a little with Matt and Jamie.
All right. And apparently his balls came up.
Artie, that's you, man. I appreciate an acrimonious caller.
Leckhead Larry, nice super producer you got there. I'm a total Leckhead. People call me Leckhead Larry. I heard Matt was 6'2". Will Matt be doing any Assassin's Creed streams and dropping some historical knowledge? Go Team Leck. Jimmy Files.
Matt sent that in.
Jimmy Files. Hey, Sam, love the recent interview about Wilmington. I moved here during COVID, and it's been really alienating. The racial situation is very obviously tense. The week we moved in was peak of BLM, and the city removed the plaques from and covered the Confederate monuments downtown to prevent people from destroying them. Hoping to meet some of my like-minded people after COVID instead of my Q flag neighbors. Anyway, thanks for the work. Oh, gosh. Hang in there. The Tim Caucus, really fascinating interview today. We'll probably read the book. I'm thinking about her point about reinvesting social capital in the context of Adnan Girdada's book, Winner Take All. And I'll need to sit with that for a while. Also, the last time Avatar brought up, Sam made the same joke. He is nothing if not consistent. I don't even remember what the joke was. Did I make a joke about Avatar? All right, two more. Sam Seder, Mexican son. The Spanish version of La Poupée is the best. I'll check that out. And the final I am of the day, Wyoming Ryan says, last week we had negative 20 Fahrenheit temps for 4 days straight. Then we saw 100-mile-per-hour gusts. The turbines were locked down for wind and not cold. Turbines here are equipped to work at minus 20 degrees plus because even Wyoming regulates its turbines. We don't use that energy, but still. Left is best. Emma, Nomi, Brendan, Kyle, who's been lurking. Thank you, guys. Good job today. See you folks tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Oh, check out Nomi's show.
To get to where I want, but I know somehow
Bye, everyone.
I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. guess somehow I lost me.